Do rock stars and hip hop artists need spiritual guidance? In this interview with Nick Barré, a personal friend of mine, he's a music producer and a talent agent for famous bands like Switchfoot and some not so famous new bands that are up and coming, and even hip hop artists like KB. He talks to us about how do you guide somebody into the music industry? What do they think success is? And how do you help them think biblically about what success should look like? We have a wide-ranging conversation about the nature of the Christian music industry and whether Christian is a word that should apply to anything but humans. What is Christian music? And by that, I mean it in the snarky way, like, should the word Christian ever apply to anything besides a human?
I don't think it should. I have, just in the same way, what is a Christian tree? What is I think it's really hard to, particularly when you look at, from a biblical worldview, when you look at the Bible being in the library, and then there's certain books of the Bible that are liner notes, and then some like Psalms are, you have certainly worship in the Psalms, but you also have the blues, you have punk rock, it's really hard to imagine. It would be like going through the book of Psalms going, okay, well, this is a secular verse, or this is where David's in a cave and he's screaming and he's mad. Okay, so you can almost hear the speed metal or the punk rock. He's angry. You've abandoned us. I thought you were going to take care of us. Do you even care? That type of thing. And then you obviously have the slow jams of the Song of Solomon, Song of Solomon, and so the whole secular Christian dichotomy. I find it's really hard for that to fit a biblical worldview, personally, and I understand that on a business side that there's categories in genres of music. I get that, but in terms of calling something Christian, I think that's problematic.
So yeah, when we say, cavalierly say the Christian music industry, it sounds to me like what you just said. We're actually talking about it from the way maybe Sony Music would think about the kind of music produced by a certain. So just thinking of it through the business lens, what do they identify as the Christian music industry? Granted that theirs might not be a good identifier of Christians who are musicians, right?
Yeah, I think it's. Let me. If I could go backwards a little bit.
Yeah, you can change my question too if it's a bad one.
Oh, okay, no. What to me is exciting in this era of streaming music is there's people are just listening to music, whereas my generation. I turned 60 later this year, believe it or not. Whoa. As a dyed-in-the-wool Gen Xer, my high school experience was every lunch table had their own genre of music. And I was at the new wave table, and then there was like the stoner kids were listening to metal, and then the cheerleaders were listening to top 40. My African American friends, they had the coolest music. The rock kids, like their favorite groups were, by the early 80s, were, some of the members were already dead, and you had some, there weren't a whole lot of country, but it was, that defined your tribe, is the music. And now if I talk to somebody who's under the age of, 35, and go, what kind of music do you like? They look at me like, what do you, it would be like asking, what kind of shirts do you like?
Right.
What? Like comfortable,
right.
affordable? Like,
yeah.
If I'm going to a job interview, I might wear a different shirt. If I'm going to a sporting event, I might, so I don't find those that, so I understand the categorization of it. So in streaming, it's and just this generation, they're not thinking in the terms of those categories. Now, if I could go back to the CD era, um, I currently work in artist management, so we help artists on all aspects of their career, finding a record deal or getting their music out, and then also on the touring side, and it's pretty holistic. But when I worked 12 years for EMI, which is now it's called Universal or Capital Christian Music Group, I would have to ask an artist or a band and say, okay, your compact disc, when I sell this into the record stores, it has to be in a section.
Right.
So it's not going to be in jazz because it's not a jazz record. It's not going to be in country. It might be in pop, or pop rock. But you tell me, what section do you want this to be in? Because it can't be in both. It has to be in one. And again, that was the limitation of the format. And so, I mean, one of the groups I worked with when one of the members was still in high school was Switchfoot, and it was like, I think your music appeals to everyone, but we could probably sell in more compact discs if you were in the Christian section, but I also don't know if that's not your objective, if that serves any purpose whatsoever. So it was.
Wait, they were in high school when you first started?
Tim Foreman was a senior in high school when they recorded that first album, Legend of Chin.
My first thought is, well, they're going to give bad answers to these questions. You ask them where do they want it, they're going to give really uninformed or dreamy answers, right?
I think it would. No, they had street smarts to begin with. They had already. I always ask, like, where is the audience? Where are you performing? And they were like, well, yeah, we play clubs in San Diego. We also they're the three original guys. John and Tim's father was a Calvary Chapel pastor, as well as Chad Butler. His father was also Calvary Chapel. So they're playing just that Southern California scene, and both, like, there was no dichotomy. So we just made the decision, let's just put it in pop rock, which is, proved to be, they've always been a band that defies categorization. So yeah, I'm kind of a little bit off track from your question, but
no, I think you're in a very roundabout way.
Okay, good. Yeah.
What do they identify as Christian music? But it really is. It's kind of like an author with the publisher. They say, okay, is this a Bible study book, or is this a devotional book, or is this for Amazon? You still have this problem of the record store with Amazon when it comes to books as well. So.
Or even, where is this podcast categorized in whatever digital service provider people are listening to this? Is it spirituality? Is it,
Believe it or not, this one is in philosophy.
Okay, see, there you go.
The Biblical Mind, but it's a philosophy podcast, or that's how it's categorized by all the systems.
Yeah, so I think those are marketing categories, and I think as long as people know what they're doing, I think what to me is, I'll go ahead and call it dangerous, but just labeling anything Christian isn't helpful for the label Christian, or defining what it means to be a Jesus follower or something that represents Jesus.
Well, why would you use the modifier dangerous?
Okay. I'll give you a specific example. For those of you that might know, Dru and I first met in Tulsa, Oklahoma, okay, which was...
Nobody knows that here.
They don't? Okay.
No, nobody knows. All right. That. Yeah.
So when we lived in Tulsa, Oklahoma, respectively, it was often referred to as the buckle of the Bible Belt. There was Oral Roberts University, Rhema Bible Training Center. It was just a just the Christian subculture was very permeated through all aspects of the town. You might have been too young because I'm older than you,
Right.
but there was not one, not two, but three Christian restaurants at one time in
Oh,
Tulsa, Oklahoma.
I didn't know there was even one.
Yes, so there was Solid Rock Cafe, which was a knockoff of Hard Rock Cafe. One was called Joshua's, that was a little more upscale, and then there was I can never say it right, the Garden of Gethsemane.
Gethsemane, yeah.
Yeah, I always mispronounce it. That was like fine dining for Christians,
Could you drink a
and
cup of Jesus's tears?
I
Or
I don't know, but that to me is like the perfect metaphor where what makes a restaurant Christian is just funny because
right.
it's such a like, do you want to have Italian? Do you want Mediterranean food? Do you want Lebanese food? Do you want Thai food? Do you want Christian food? It's some of those titles are helpful. Christian is not helpful.
Yeah. That's
You know,
great. Okay, that makes it a very poignant example where it becomes like very clear that Christian is not doing as much work there.
yeah. Do you like Christian food? Yeah, sure. What does that mean?
Yeah, I don't
You
know.
know, yeah.
Sacrifice, sweat, holiness. I don't know if I'd want any food except for lamb off the altars. Um,
Right.
but you said dangerous. Why is that dangerous?
Well, I think it dilutes the what it means to the word Christian is so abused to describe. I'm a Christian plumber.
Hmm.
I'm a Christian politician. I'm a Christian fill in the blank. The restaurant to me is it's so silly. It really that was real, but it's so absurd that it feels a little. Uh, it's just not helpful.
Right.
It's
Do you
it
want a
all it
Christian
is they're trying to
proctologist? Or,
sell. It's they're adding the name Christian to attract a target audience, which again, I defer to you on the biblical scholarship, but um, using God's name for a purpose for your own benefit is that to me is dangerous. Um, am I just identifying with Christ for myself, or am I trying to point to our Father? So.
hey there, if you've benefited from this content at all, please hit the like and subscribe, or subscribe and like, one of those or both of them together on this video. It helps us tremendously with the math algorithm nerd monsters. Yeah, I accidentally talked over you and told
Oh,
a joke. Um,
oh,
but
the tears joke,
no, I
or
want to tell it again. I think the next level of this example would go to, you're looking for a good proctologist. You get the Christian proctologist, or
yeah, yeah,
the secular proctologist,
yeah.
where it's I could make a few jokes, but I'm going to restrain. So okay, so but you work in the music industry in a Christian sector, right? Or exclusively with Christian artists? How would you define
Um,
your role in?
I work with a few I work with artists that are all followers of Jesus. Some talk about their faith in more detail, and and it kind of ties into their well, kind of it ties into their calling. So they're it's in the same way that no two churches are going to look the same, or your ministry is going to be different from everyone else's. Um, the I feel like the calling of an artist. No artist wants to cut and paste what somebody else has done into their own calling or career or ministry, um, and um, and so the fact that it's unique, that's another nice way of saying that it's supposed to feel weird. It's supposed to be different. So it's I think there's a lot of I think you would be really surprised by the similarities between certain people in non-musical ministry and those that make music, I think one of the things that's common is that these by nature these are people who are gifted. So you see a gifted pastor or a gifted teacher, and it's very natural in our culture for those people to have a large audience or people that listen to them, read them, etc. Which for any public figure, there's just saying that where somebody with the gift is kind of exalted to a level. In my experience, two things happen. One is they get more criticism than an average civilian.
Right.
It's like, I like your old episodes. I don't like the one with the music guy. I
Right.
like the this or that. I don't like your shirt.
Right.
You're too casual. You're too dressy, whatever. That's just a reality, that something that I, as not a public figure, don't have to deal with. But on the other side, you get more affirmation publicly than I do. You've changed, oh my gosh, Dru Johnson changed my life. He's, this,
Yet to
oh
hear
my
that
gosh.
one, but I'm
Yeah.
hoping one of my kids will say.
Yeah. But this people I'm sure have gone up to you and just said, man, this has been so significant. I've seen the scriptures in a different light. I understand my faith better. And, um, and pastors, teachers, anyone, and artists certainly get that as well. And in my unscientific um, observations, experience, I see more soul damage done from the affirmation than the criticism. Um, I think because the affirmation is so intoxicating, and I can never think of a time where it's hard for me to think of a time where anyone has affirmed me and I haven't totally savored every moment of that. Maybe not publicly, I would feel awkward, but privately, 5 minutes after I got the affirmation, I'm cherishing that. And it can be, like I said, intoxicating. And the challenge is that um, for an artist or any public figure, you're not the worst person of all time. You're also not the greatest person of all time. And so it's challenging to have a kingdom perspective of your identity, where our identity should be in the cross, but there's so many false barometers, and I just think when you see whether it's a pastor or certainly a musician, artist, it's the same problems that you and I deal with. It's just public, so everything's just exaggerated. So when somebody spins out in that arena, it's more it's a more spectacular crash. And there's probably more shrapnel as well as maybe poor choices that you or I would make, or somebody listening to this right now. So I do think I don't know if I fully answered your question, but there's so when you add trying to be Christ-centered in that, it's already incredibly tricky to navigate just that, of the identity of how do you, who've received a gift, and if we have a gift, we're supposed to use it to serve others. And then when you're trying to be a servant and yet people are making you, at least in the arena that I work in, sometimes a legitimate rock star. Like,
Right.
we use that as a metaphor of somebody that's, you know,
You've actually
and
managed some real rock stars.
I have managed I know some real rock stars, and the human heart was not made to be worshipped. And so it's really critical to have community and um, those types of things in place.
I mean, what you're saying like makes so much sense. Even when I was a pastor, I just remember thinking, "Oh, nobody told me when you become a pastor, you're like a politician at this point. Like they can talk about your
Yeah.
kids, they can talk about your parenting. It's like all of a sudden you've entered public life." It also sounds to me, hearing you talk about it, like that different artists see their ministry differently and they incorporate it in their artistry differently. You know, some maybe put it in the front burner and their lyrics are all about their ministry or something, or about their relationship with God or leading others. Um, that it sounds like your ministry is also part of shepherding people through that process, right? Because it sounds like the fame and acclaim that come with being a good artist, good at what you're at and gifted, is really just a test. And you know,
Right.
like a machine gun, it'll pull to your weakest side when you pull the trigger. Fame will pull them to their weakest side, and you have to guide them through that as well.
Yeah, I feel like, and again, when I say pastoral, it's with a lowercase p,
Yeah,
not
yeah, yeah.
like there's a shepherding. I feel in the role that I play, I feel sometimes I can help an artist. I can help identify. I use the term superpower because it sounds a little less spiritual and more whimsical, but to say, hey, when you talk about this subject, like something happens. Like that's, oh, everyone can do that. No, not everyone can do that. I think that might be a gifting. Oh, well, and I think a lot of people, when they're operating in their gift, it feels they're not exerting a lot of energy because it's a gift.
Mm.
And it's easy to go, oh, well, everybody has that. And so I would say not every artist, but a lot of artists, they're, because they've been given a God-given gift, it just feels like not like work.
Mhm.
And I'm sure there's moments in your life, Drew, as a teacher, where it's like, oh, everybody sees this. Well, not really. So it gives me great joy to help artists identify or emphasize, hey, this is something that I think makes you different from
Mm.
artist XYZ. So
I imagine that you have probably seen the opposite as well, where people think they have a gifting and they're trying to lean into it really hard, and you're going, "Yeah, that's not your jam, man. Get back on."
oh, wait, I have
Oh,
something to show you. Hang
all
on.
right.
This is good.
This is
So
happening live.
this is happening live. Okay, this is my office. This is a baseball.
I recognize that.
I paid autographed. I paid $80 for this. It's autographed by Michael Jordan.
Oh,
Okay. So
I already get where this is going.
yeah. So what sometimes
Well, explain it for
um
our audience because we might have some
I
younger
will.
people that don't know how it goes.
Yeah, okay. So Michael Jordan, most people would say if he's not the greatest of all time, he's certainly within the top two. I can't think of anyone that wouldn't think he was in the top three
Right.
greatest basketball players of all time. Who's number one, whatever, but he's openly regarded of just dominating as a basketball player. Well, for a short time, he stepped away from basketball to see if he could be a professional baseball player. And he was certainly better than me and you
Right.
and
And almost everybody we know.
everyone else.
Yeah.
But he wasn't good enough to make it to the major leagues. He played for a AAA team and did okay. And there's nothing wrong with baseball, and there's certainly nothing wrong with Michael Jordan. But when he was on a basketball court, he was like Godzilla. I mean, he was just unstoppable. So I think sometimes when an artist there's an aspirational calling, like, man, I really would like to do such and such. And we've all done this
Hmm.
where I would love to take a shot at this or do this. And then there's times where you're in your calling and it's unexplainable. So I use this. Sometimes I'll have conversations here in my office with artists
Oh yeah.
going, maybe,
Maybe hip hop isn't your thing.
yeah, maybe it's not, or yeah, or whatever it is.
Get back on country.
Um, yeah, exactly. So I think too, the roster of artists I serve is so incredibly, insanely diverse. I'm really proud of that. That it's. I think it would be very, very challenging for anyone to figure out that the same person who's doing a marketing plan for Casting Crowns is the same one that's helping out KB, the hip hop artist, podcaster, author, and is the same guy behind Ben Fuller or Leanna Crawford or the band Reeves and Brandon Heath, and that so that helps me to switch channels of like there's not like this is what
Right.
and
Stick with
each
some
of those
authority.
artists, yeah, and so and each of them has their own strengths and their own baseball basketball metaphor. So anyway,
Yeah. So what would be on the continuum of Nick Barré's artist portfolio? Uh, who would be the extremes, like the ones that are like just culturally, stylistically, the most opposite of each other?
I probably
Public perception, of course.
well, KB is just this as a dynamic live show. Hip hop genre is just so performances are so there's such a level of intensity to them. And then you have somebody like Leanna Crawford, who's having tremendous success right now, who is singing acoustic songs from a female perspective and talking about tranquility and peace and Psalm 23 and things
Right.
like that. And then you have singer songwriters, and then a band like We Are Messengers, where it's just pretty hyperactive and high energy. Uh, and that includes not just the music, but the communicating of truth, and
Mm.
um, would be somebody like a Brandon Heath, where he's on a stool sharing a story, and so it's yeah, it's I will say this professionally, I'm always looking for when the artist seems the most relaxed, or the most comfortable, or where they seem the most uncomfortable. So and yeah, that's kind of what I do.
Um, so you're in your office. Those on YouTube can see your office there. So is this where you have the conversations with the artists? Is right there. This is in
Yeah,
Nashville.
we also have a conference room, and
Okay. Yeah. This is where
these
you. This is
happen
where
in
you break
coffee
all.
shops, airports, and everywhere.
Do
So
you, do you crush dreams and make them come true there? Because you have to have those hard conversations with the people that you're not going to sign. I assume as
right,
well.
yeah, I don't. Well, it's impossible for it to be like my church, for example. I go to Journey Church in Franklin, Tennessee, and I love it. But there's no way that it's God's will for everyone to go to my church. Like that's just. And if it were, it would immediately the sniff test would go, okay, that's
Right.
not legit. Like
That's a
something.
cult.
So I also feel like to tell somebody they're not called to something um, is not my role, because this is also um, a vocation. There's certain uh, economics that make themselves self-evident of like, okay, we're promoting this, we're telling your story, and particularly with online data, with streaming numbers and social media numbers, you get a tremendous amount of data of people who are resonating with either what you're saying or the music that you're performing and sharing with others. And sometimes you kind of, as much as I like to think that you can control that, sometimes you can't.
Hmm.
And I think it also comes down to defining success. So um, I'm just thinking of your story. If you were like to define success for you personally as an author, let's just focus on that aspect. Um, the immediately, like, what would be the most let's say you had like an amazing conversion from being a devil worshiper or something like
Right.
if you were like, hey, this guy's available to speak at conferences, and he's going to talk about all these rituals he did, and
Mike
here's
Warnke is who you're referring to.
well, yeah, and or what, fill in the blank,
Right.
whatever the thing is.
Right.
It's like suddenly like, oh, okay, that's going to be a lot more interesting than systematic theology or Hebrew thought. And with all due respect,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
but that's you'll also be miserable. So an artist, um, uh, it could be I want to, if you were to do love songs, you could make more money or do
Mm,
that. Well, they're still going to be miserable. Or I think it's fascinating too of people who are sometimes in the church and lead worship, wish they were could write songs outside the church, and then the high number of people who are legitimately playing for an audience that might be unchurched or wishing that they could sing more
mm,
specifically about their faith. So it's just the human nature of I want what that person has. So it's and some of it's trial and error. Some of it is I think I should play clubs, and then they go. I'm like, may I make a suggestion? Have you ever played a club before? No, no. Why don't you play a club? Oh my gosh, I can't tell a 5 minute story like I can in front of a college audience or a theater or a church. Yeah, why? Because they're not there for the music, they're there to hang out.
right.
Okay. Well, I don't want to compromise my art to just do, in some environments you can't play a ballad because the room, uh, yeah. So I think I find it really exciting once the artist is identified um, through a variety of reasons. Sometimes it's intuitive, sometimes it's through trial and error, what their place is in the body of Christ. When that's really exciting when you can help give them opportunities and connect them to that audience. It's great. It's incredibly frustrating when they want to do something and people don't respond as well.
Yeah.
So
What is the deal with you use the phrase, sorry, this is going to be a total rabbit trail, but
bring it.
compromise their art. I'm thinking like as a college professor who can has a freedom to teach kind of widely what I want in the classroom. But even then, almost everything is constrained to like how are the students going to understand this? Publishing, absolutely. You know, you have your ideas. You have this like way that you always say this that you thought was so clever, and then the editor's like, "Yeah, nobody's going to understand that in a book." You know, like that works in a lecture hall. I feel like I am constantly compromising my art in order to kind of fit the audience in the medium, kind of like the club versus the stadium or the church thing. So, why do artists feel like they get a pass on this? And it might just be
Yeah.
economics, right? Like, I work for a company who pays me to do certain things, or I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I mean, that, uh, let's take a break from art for a second and just focus on churches.
Right. Okay.
So if the definition of success for a church is to just co-opt that of the culture at large, it means bigger, better, more money.
Right.
So you could pastor a church that's absolutely massive. Does that mean it's a great church? Uh, does that mean that maybe it has great facilities, great programs, but it doesn't mean that it's reflecting Jesus in a way to that community? And so again, it's the same thing for an artist is like, I want to be in front of a lot of people. One thing that's very, very common is a lot of artists will come off once they're on American Idol or The Voice or one of those shows, they come to Nashville. And there's a lot of those people that are Christians. And so they're trying to figure out next steps. And they thought, well, what they wanted to be was famous. And they
Mm.
were famous for about 6 weeks, and now they're not famous, and so now they've got to figure that whole thing out, and it's so uh, disorienting. The it's it's such a moving target because if I was famous, but I didn't get to do my own songs. Okay, cool. Well, now I got to do my own songs, but nobody cares. Or um, my art is really pure, but you can sell bigger venues than I do, or I sell big venues, but I don't get the critics hate me. So I just feel like there's that Thomas Jefferson of, sorry, Teddy Roosevelt, not comparisons the thief of joy. So whatever it's, again, to have somebody to say, what are you trying to do? I feel like the same way, back to the church metaphor. How can we locally impact our community? Let's just focus on that. Nobody cares the biggest church lists that come out at the end of every year. Nobody cares about that. Like,
Right.
nobody cares about that. And the people that care about it, it's whatever. It's are you connecting with people? Yes or no? And I do feel like the economics and all the vocational stuff kind of, not to be hippy dippy, but it kind of works out. I feel like that should be the focus. That should be the defining success.
Yeah.
So I try to make it as small as possible. Like, okay, there's a girl in her dorm room who's listening with their AirPods, who, has never had a boyfriend and who's trying to figure out this, feels like God. She feels ugly. She feels stupid. She feels weird. How can, like, trying to make it very, very specific of how do we reach that person, and that is hopefully what success looks like. And there's a variety of ways to reach that person, through getting them on certain playlists or radio stations or live shows, etc.
It's funny the way you describe it. I think for most of us, the music industry and kind of fame sounds so ethereal and mystical. And I know there are like magical elements to it that you don't know. Some people just strike in a surprising way in which you didn't. But the way you're describing it, it sounds very much like corporate thinking. You're just walking through normal steps of creating a small industry or a startup. And each performer is kind of like their own little business unit, right? And
Well, it's funny you say that, because what I do in artist management, we manage our boss. The artist is our boss, which is another way of telling artists, you are, just on a vocational level, you are a CEO. So my job, I can't, in the same way, if I work for a CEO, I can't tell them what to do. I can make suggestions. I can show them data. I'm not doing my job if I just say that everything's awesome or everything's terrible. And so that's, again, part of the iron sharpening iron. In the same way that if a pastor wanted to do some building fund for the church, and it doesn't make strategic sense or economics, either the elders or other staff members or the congregation, they're going to say something if they love that pastor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If they love them and they're not infatuated with them. Yeah.
Precisely.
Let's talk about the market, because you were talking about reaching that, that college freshman who's sitting there and not feeling good about themselves. I was listening to something the other day. I don't remember what, but the person pointed, it was Rick Beato. I don't know if you ever watch his YouTubes, but
I haven't.
Oh, he's great. He's like 65-year-old guy, session musician who's been in the industry forever, and he just has great takes on insider stuff. And he had somebody on who was pointing out that if you look at the top 20 pop list right now, I guess, he'd say, as an old person, you look at it and you go like, I don't recognize almost anybody on that list. And he said, but if you show that same list to a 20-year-old, they would also say, yeah, I don't recognize half the people on this list, right? So this is not the pop list when you and I were 20 years old.
Oh, yeah.
It's super fragmented, and that the goal of an artist now, instead of creating kind of a wide audience, is actually to drill down as deep as possible and get like super fans who will just listen and listen and listen and buy anything you put out, which fragments. And I see this in class where I ask students what their favorite artist is, and I started seeing this years ago, and someone would mention somebody and half the class would be like, I've never heard of that person before in my life. So how do you deal with that from your end? Or correct that image if you think it's wrong.
No, it's great. I think that's, you literally had meeting first thing this morning with a booking agency and an artist, and we were trying to find artists to tour with, etc. And there's this, what the scoreboard is really challenging in terms of what the market value is of an artist. I'm not even talking about their musical, artistic, or spiritual impact, but just what their market value is. And there could be somebody that's received a lot of press or nice media hits, or but then the number I look at is consumption of music on demand streams. So I have access to, if you name anybody, I can pull up what they're streaming across all the platforms
including
is.
podcast.
I not pot, but music. Okay.
Oh.
There are some people. My friends at Sony have their podcast division has something like that. But that, just because somebody is consuming or streaming somebody's music doesn't mean that they're going to buy a ticket. And so it's tricky. One quick anecdotal thing. My oldest son, he now lives in Washington D.C. He moved there earlier this year, but he went to Baylor University and then worked in Dallas Fort Worth up until January of this year. And all of his favorite artists, I would be like, what? Like, and one of them, and some of your listeners would be like, I can't believe you haven't heard of this guy. But it was the group Turnpike Troubadours, which I was like, never even heard of them.
And you're in the music industry.
I'm in the music industry. And he's like, yeah, they sold out the American Airlines Center where the Mavericks play 2 nights in a row. And I'm like, no, there's no way. And I started pulling numbers, and I can also see where people are consuming it. And in Texas, they're like Coldplay. I mean, they are the biggest band in the world. They're starting to break out into other markets. But down in Seattle, that they would be able to sell very well. So now you have, which I think is super cool, is like this band, there's certain artists that are in Texas, the biggest artists on the planet. And so to that world. So it's
I did not realize it was geographically fragmented.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's so it's again, defining success is such a tricky thing for anyone, all of us, which is, I think our default, because the world is usually money, which isn't sometimes the most accurate, and I would say the kingdom would kind of turn that on its head, that's not the end all.
Yeah, I never thought about that before. I always say I'm big in Brazil because I've sold more of my Portuguese translations than my English, my natively written English books, thanks to the Portuguese translator. So you have somebody like that. You say, "What's success?" And if you say, "Well, look, I can make you big in Texas, or I can make you huge in Iowa," right? I'm going to guess most people are going to say, "No, that's not what I want."
It's a stage. So literally, I'm working with a new band called Band Reeves. We're signed to a label here in Nashville, and we just literally last week just did a radio promo tour that was only in Texas. They're from Texas. They only went to Texas radio stations as well as Tulsa, our former home, and in Oklahoma City. But that's the only focus right now. It'll go somewhere else. I mentioned Switchfoot earlier. We focused exclusively on their first album, exclusively on Southern California.
Yeah, because that's where they're from, right?
It's where they're from, and so it's and they could tour easy. They could, and it's just, again, with streaming, there are people that have viral moments where it's just ubiquitous, but there is something about being able to impact people deeply and be in front of them multiple times physically. as well as develop friends or partnerships with other like-minded artists or organizations, etc.
Do you, before we leave, there's a ton of people out there. You're in Nashville, so like you're swimming in people who are trying to break into the music industry. But what's like your go-to advice for Christians? I'm sure it would be advice for general people as well, but for Christians, prepare. Maybe they are naturally gifted and they have everything lined up on their side. What do
Yeah.
you tell people?
Uh, First of all, it's a very good question. And I think I sometimes tell artists, you're not thinking small enough. And by that, like, they're worried about, gosh, nobody's listening to me in Brazil. I'm not big like Dru Johnson, just in Brazil.
With a very niche crowd of Brazilians. Meus
Whereas, okay,
brasileiros.
yeah, like somebody that's in the early 20s, you can't afford to go tour Alaska and don't even think about that. Whereas, so I think a few things, right, is if for a musician, if there's other disciplines, this would apply, just change the medium. But I think for a musician, write as many songs as possible and play in front of as many people as possible and diverse amount of people, types of people. Because I think that will help go, oh, well, I thought I was just like a Christian person because I only played in church, but man, this really resounded when I played at that Christian restaurant. Just kidding. The um, the So I feel like that helps can help. I call them like breadcrumbs to find out your calling by actually, because so suddenly you would have information to say, if someone were to say, I think your music wouldn't appeal to somebody in their 20s, you can go, I appreciate your opinion, but I know
Hmm.
I've seen it. Like I know. And so I feel like that is it helps you. I also feel like it's something you control. It prevents victimization where, well, I'm just waiting for the phone
Hmm.
to call or someone to call my phone or send me an email, as opposed to just what can you control? Control being a loaded word, of course, but I can find within a whatever type of music somebody plays to do the work of within a hour and a half drive. I want to play for these people for free. I want to play at this school. I want to play at this. um, there's I feel like a career in the arts, you're going to get used to. You have to get used to a lot of rejection and
And in academics as well.
exactly, yeah. Well, and just life, and
Yeah. Yeah.
so to be able to, along with that, to go, wow, there's affirmation. This is great. This really, why did this work? Why did it not work? Um, to be able to figure that out and to have intel, I just feel like is so valuable, as opposed to having a quote unquote expert like myself or one of my peers tell you, oh, you should, write a book about such and such subject. So anyway.
I think that's great. I always say with the Enneagram and Myers Briggs and all those, I say, yeah, those are fine. But if you really want to know, go ask your family and friends to tell you about yourself, and you'll find out a lot more.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, yeah.
Like
Exactly.
you test bed, and I think that's great. Well, I began this.
I got
Oh,
a
go
great,
ahead.
great quote. All right, back to the young artist. There's a line in Bruce Springsteen's autobiography, Born to Run, that is so good. It's just a throwaway line in the book, but it just hit me hard. And he was talking about people promoting his music. And he said, my business is show business. And that is, you don't tell people anything, you show them.
Hmm.
And, and as simple as that is, I was like, it's one thing to say, hey, I am a worship leader. Cool. Do you lead worship? No. Then don't tell me. Just show me. Like, oh, I write songs for this group of people. Cool. Well, don't tell me. Like, show me what do you got. So I do feel, again, I wish there wasn't the word show business, but there is something, there's probably a more spiritual word of like actually doing it, and as opposed to telling people about your art or your gifts.
I
Just show
feel
them.
like we come from a faith tradition that really emphasizes walking the walk, um, over talking the talk. So yeah, I feel like that resonates. Um, I began this whole conversation thinking that we were going to get inside music industry information, which we did along the way. But what I think we actually got from you is that it turns out music artists are on their own journey with God,
Yeah.
others spirituality, and that I thank God that there are people like you involved in their lives, because I know you're just the right kind of person to do that. Nick Barré, I thank you so much for your wisdom and your time. And then some other time, maybe even the intro, I'll tell people exactly how I know you and all the various stages in life you've seen me. So really appreciate you spending your time with us today, Nick.
Well, thank you for just sharing this time with me, Drew. I'm your biggest fan, and I'm so grateful, and I'm a blessed man that I have you in my life, and so
You,
proud of everything you've done.
ditto for me. See you.
All right, all right.